Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started if that's okay with you, Casey. Great. Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Liz Parker, and I'm a member of the Boulder County Bar Association's board. Thank you for joining us for today's presentation on best practices for replacing vital records. Whether you're joining us live today or via home study later, we're glad you're here. Thank you. Today's presentation is part of the Bar Association's series of free CLEs related to the Marshall Fire. The presentation will be available in the coming days on the Bar Association's YouTube channel. Our lead presenter today is Casey Sherman. Casey is the supervising attorney of the ID project at Colorado Legal Services. She's been doing ID work for 4 years and working as a legal aid attorney for 7. She's licensed in Colorado and Arkansas. The ID project is a special project at Colorado Legal Services that assists low-income and senior Coloradans with obtaining identity credentials and resolving complex identity issues. Casey, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks so much for presenting today.
Of course. Thank you, Liz. And I've got a presentation here, so I'm going to share my screen. All right. Can everyone see the presentation? Or at least one person see it?
Yes, I've got it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so I tried to tailor this presentation to if a person's getting their documents on their own, but also kind of some best tips for legal representatives if you're helping a client to do these things. So it's kind of a mix of both because the process is a little different depending on if you're doing it yourself or if you're doing it on behalf of your client. So I've tried to put myself in the perspective of the Marshall Fire survivors. So they've lost their credentials and they need to start the process of replacing everything. So if they can, the best place to start is replacing their Colorado ID. So once they get that, everything else is quite a bit easier. They can get their birth certificate, social, passport, or any USCIS documentation that they need. They'll do this by going to the DMV and scanning their fingerprint to verify their identity. If they've never had a Colorado ID, then it's a bit trickier of a process. But I imagine since most of these people were already residents in the area, that would be the most common situations that they're replacing documents. If the fingerprint doesn't read when they go to replace their document, they'll probably need to present a birth certificate or other lawful presence document like a green card. They may need help from a family member getting that if they're not able to get their ID and need their birth certificate to get their ID. So if you are getting an ID for the first time from DMV, this is their process. So again, this wouldn't be relevant to people who are replacing documents, just first time issuance through the standard process. So they need to verify their identity and lawful presence, which can be done through one document or 2 separate documents. So if they're doing it through one document, it would be a Colorado ID that they're replacing, an unexpired enhanced out-of-state ID, which is different from a real ID. An enhanced ID is basically a passport ID, and only the states listed here actually offer those. It's got a little American flag on the bottom of it. They're also using an unexpired passport because it shows your identity and your status, a green card, or a certificate of naturalization or citizenship issued in the past 20 years. If they don't have one of those documents, then they'll be using 2 separate documents to verify identity and lawful presence. Most commonly, it's a birth certificate and an out-of-state ID. DMV is really picky about who they'll accept birth certificates from. They want state or counties, not cities. The only cities that they'll take through the standard process are New York City and Washington, D.C. They can also use a consular report of birth abroad, which is like when kids are born on military bases abroad. So they're citizens at birth, but they're not born in the continental United States. That's the document that they'll be issued. They can also use older certificates of naturalization. And in some cases, adoption orders, that one's a bit more complicated though. And then the identity document, which all the ones that they accept are listed here. And then the second part will be to verify their residency using one of these proofs. They need 2 documents, and it can be the same 2 types, like 2 letters. And then the name needs to be consistent across the records or verified or connected using a name change document. Someone will also need to provide their social security number verbally. They don't have to provide their card anymore, and it'll need to match against social security system called Solve. So it checks first and last name and the number to confirm that they're consistent. If the person doesn't have an out-of-state ID or passport or any of those other identity documents, then they'll need to go through exceptions processing. This is what most of our clients wind up doing. So it's a special carve out for people who don't have those documents and need to present other kind of whole picture identity documents. So DMV still wants a lawful presence document. And the only change here is that they'll accept a city birth certificate in exceptions processing. So like if the city of Dallas issued your birth certificate, you could use it in EP. Proof of residency is the same. And then they want 3 identity documents. At least one needs to be 5 years or older or informed by data that's 5 years or older. For instance, if you get a marriage license, the issue date will be today, but the record itself contains information dating back. So that would be the date that they use. And at least one of the documents needs to be a certified original. So like that marriage license that I mentioned, as long as it's issued by the custodian, then it would be an official record. And then they offer these different categories, and they want records from different categories. For instance, you couldn't provide a medical record, an immunization record, and a hospital birth record because those are all the same type. And then here's the regulatory basis for exceptions processing. So for reasons beyond their control, they must present these alternative documents. And again, you have to track the name changes. So that rule's the same as well in standard process and exceptions process. Another exception is proof of residency. I believe they'll accept this in the standard process as well, but it's only described in Rule 16, which is the exceptions processing rule. So people who don't have a main primary residence can obtain a letter from a shelter or social agency stating that they received services there. The letter just needs to be signed by an appropriate staff member of that organization and contain the full physical address. So that will be the address printed on the ID. For instance, a lot of our clients get services at the St. Francis Center. So they'll issue a letter, the person received services here, and then 2323 Curtis Street is the address printed on their ID. And CORCSA is the Colorado Road and Community Safety Act, which is the ID program for people with temporary lawful status and no lawful status. So you can use exceptions processing to verify identity in that program as well. And here's a bit more about the Road and Community Safety Act. It's also known as SB 251, which was the bill that originated the program. And it divides the process into temporary status or no lawful status. We don't do these much, and I imagine it may not come up much for you guys as well, but here's the information. This PowerPoint will be sent out, and you can reference it later if you need to as well. DMV has some really great information on their website. So what most of you guys will probably be doing, or most of your clients, is replacing a document. So their identity and their lawful status should already be verified within DMV's system. So they'll go in and scan their fingerprint to match themselves to their record that already exists. They may need to still provide their social verbally, if depending on when their last document was issued, it may not already be on file. If the fingerprint doesn't read, then they'll need to present their birth certificate or other lawful presence document. So the residency issue was one that I anticipated may be problematic for some of the Marshall Fire survivors. So if there's been no change of residence, then they don't need to show any new documents, and the credential will be reissued with their last place of residence on it. They can verbally provide a preferred mailing address because the document gets mailed. So you'll get a temp the same day at the DMV, but then your actual piece of plastic comes in the mail about a week or two later. So if If your primary residence is the same, like where you're registered to vote and all that, you want to leave that the same, but send your document to another safe address, then you can verbally provide that preferred mailing address. If there's any issue with delivery, credentials get returned to the Lakewood DMV, which handily is actually the address that's on the sample ID right here, the 1881 Pierce Street address. So people can go pick it up there. They'll need to verify some of their personal information, their address, date of birth, and then they can hand it over to them. And then again, shelters and social agencies can issue letters if they want to update the actual place of residence. And then here's the basis for the Real ID Act and the state ID laws that we work within. So that was a ton of information. Does anyone have questions about that? All right, move on to birth certificates. So Colorado birth certificates, there's a few ways to get it. Vitalcheck.com is the easiest online option, but the downside is that it's pretty slow. I think our recent experiences were about 2 or 3 months to get birth certificates when ordered that way, like Colorado birth certificates. There's also a $13 processing fee and then possibly another $20 mailing fee if you opt for that. The easiest, fastest option is to go to your county office to go get it. So the Boulder birth certificate offices or vital records offices are 3450 Broadway and 1515 or 515 Kaufman in Longmont. There are also state CDPHE offices, but I don't think there's one in Boulder. There's only 4 in the state. You've got to book an appointment in advance, and they're kind of tough to get. So I would go to the county office if possible. Colorado birth certificates are $20 and then $32 on VitalCheck is a possible mailing fee. There's a message in it. Oh, sorry, I'll try to speak up. Is that a little better? Make this closer. Metro Caring is one of our community partners, and they have a voucher program that provides vouchers for Colorado IDs, driver licenses, permits, and birth certificates. The ID driver license vouchers are usable at pretty much all of the state driver license offices, but the birth certificate vouchers are only redeemable at 2 locations, and they're both in Denver. So it's not quite as useful as the ID vouchers. But if you have clients that do need ID vouchers, they can call the main CLS office. We can mail them, or I believe Brett has them in her office as well. Brett, do you guys have hours that people can walk in?
We are not currently doing walk-in hours. However, our main office number, if people call that, they can schedule a time to come in. Part of it is with COVID, we're still doing a fair amount of work from home in the Boulder office.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Thank you, Brett. And who can get a Colorado birth certificate that's usually the tricky part. So family members can get their other family members' birth certificates. So let me pull up. This is from CDPHE's website. So all of these parties can get a birth certificate for someone else. And then the fun part is, as a legal representative, you can represent any of these parties listed as long as you have a retainer agreement, so proof of your attorney-client relationship, and then proof of your client's relationship to the actual party. So I could get my client's spouse's birth certificate to kind of illustrate that. And if you've lost your ID and you can't get it replaced, then you're going to need to lean on these folks to get some help. And then CDPHE and the county vital records offices also require proof of identification to release it. So of the requester, not of the registrant. So here is the full list of identity documents. So the primary document is everything that you would think of as a primary identity document. And if you don't have those, then you can use the secondary document list, and you'll need to provide 2 of those items.
Casey, sorry, at least for me, I'm not seeing when you're going to these links. So I don't know if that's the experience of everyone else, but if you could maybe just describe them a little bit more.
Sure.
You know, with the slide, I could see your birth certificate slide, but not the web pages you're going to.
We forgot to test that when we tried things out. Okay, so for eligible parties to receive a birth certificate are the current spouse, ex-spouse, parent, co-parent, step-parent, legal guardian, grandparents or great-grandparents, siblings or half-siblings, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, legal representative and paralegals, attorney in fact or agent, consular corporation or consular corps or consulate offices, adoption agencies, genealogists, in-laws, aunts, uncles, nephews, nieces, cousins, recruiters, and government agencies. So Colorado is a lot more broad than a lot of states on who can get another person's birth certificate. For instance, in New York State, a parent can get their child's birth certificate and a person can get their own birth certificate, and that's it. Everything else requires authorization from the registrant. And then on identity documents required to get a birth certificate. So the primary document list, you just need to provide one of these, is the alien registration receipt or permanent resident card, so a green card, a certificate of citizenship, a jail temporary inmate ID. This says Denver or Pueblo County only. I'm not sure what makes those two counties so special. Colorado Department of Corrections ID, Colorado Department of Human Services Youth Corrections ID, Colorado Temporary Driver's License or State ID, it must be unexpired, an employment authorization card, a foreign passport, government work ID, Job Corps ID, U.S. Merchant Mariner card or book, driver's license or ID card, foreign driver's license or ID card, school, university, or college ID that's current, a temporary resident card, and then a few other USCIS documents, including a military ID and a passport. And then the secondary documents, these have to be expired less than 6 months, and you have to provide 2 of them. But they are the acknowledgement of parents document, so for the state of Colorado only, birth certificate of the applicant, so presumably that's not going to work for getting your own birth certificate, a court order for adoption or name change, craft or trade license from Colorado, DD 214, which is a military discharge document, divorce decree, Colorado gaming license, hospital birth worksheet if getting a birth certificate within 6 months of birth, Colorado hunting or fishing license, foreign or international driving license or ID card, marriage license or certificate, Medicaid card, Medicare card, Mexican voter registration card, motor vehicle registration or title, pilot license, state, territorial, or federal prison or DOC ID, social security card, selective service card or letter, a weapon or gun permit, a work ID, paycheck stub within the last 3 months, or W-2 within the last tax year. Any expired document from the primary list cannot be accepted or expired more than 6 months. So Colorado's a bit more generous in what they'll take to verify someone's who can get a document and how to verify your identity to get that document. I think my slideshow went back to the very beginning. Okay, is everyone on the Colorado birth certificate page?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. And then, so you have to verify information for them to be able to release it to you as well. So you need to know the registrant's full name, their parents' names, including mom's maiden name, date of birth, and place of birth. This has gotten tricky for some of our clients in the past when they didn't know if their dad was listed, or maybe it was a dad that they didn't know that was listed, or if their name had been changed through a custody or child support action to take their other parent's last name. So that part can be a little tricky if the person's getting their own, because their ID or whatever identity document they're presenting, they're going to want to see how it matches the record itself. And then out-of-state birth certificates. Vital Check, so vitalcheck.com, no C, CHEK is the fastest option for most states when ordering out-of-state birth certificates. If you Google Oklahoma birth certificate, you're going to get about 4 ads that are probably just websites that charge you $50 to fill out the application and then send it to the agency, which you could do for free. So be very wary of the Google search results. Look for anything with a .gov if you're not using Vital Check. And then this has a link as well to CDC's compiled a list of all the state agencies and how to contact them to get a birth certificate. You can order directly from all the states and even some of the counties. A lot of the counties have online ordering options that are very fast. And the who can order varies wildly by state. So you saw how broad Colorado's rules are. New York, again, is another state it's probably the most restrictive, that it's only those 2 parties and then someone with authorization from the registrant. So legal representative can order. Sometimes you have to get authorization from the registrant as well. Sometimes it needs to be notarized. Some states have other quirky requirements that are always written on their application form. For instance, Michigan requires 3 identity documents to go with a third-party order. So I just ordered one of these yesterday, and I had a school record, a jail record, and a DHS record that I sent along with the application for my client. Again, you'll have to verify your identity as the requester. So usually it's a valid ID. Sometimes you can use those secondary documents like Colorado accepts. And if ordering through Vital Check, some of the states require the delivery address that the ID or the birth certificate is sent to match your address on your ID and possibly the address on your credit card. So it varies by state, and you just have to watch those requirements closely. In some states, instead of requiring an ID, will pull questions from your credit report and verify your identity that way so that you don't have to submit anything. And the identity questions will be for the requester, not for the registrant. So if I'm ordering on behalf of my client, the questions are from my credit report. There's no consistency in the fees. It varies wildly. I think Florida's the cheapest at about $9. I think we did a Connecticut recently that was about $60. And again, sometimes Vital Check fees are added on. Sometimes there's a $20 mailing fee that's mandatory. So it varies. The cheapest option is always to order directly from the state by mail, but you have to send in their application form, a check, and then all the other enclosures that they require. Some possible issues that you might encounter is that the birth certificate may be in a different name from all the person's other documents. So like that case I mentioned where I had a client whose her last name was changed through a custody action when she was 17. She didn't know, she wasn't able to get her birth certificate. We were able to get it as third party once we had figured out that the name had been changed, but CDPHE couldn't even release that information to her. Another issue can be that the person doesn't have a birth certificate. And if you encounter this, just send them to us. You really don't want to deal with that. They're difficult cases, but the resolution would be a delayed registration of birth, which our office does assist with. Okay, and then the next one people always ask about, Social Security cards. So 2 years into the pandemic, Social Security is still closed to the public. So your only options are to replace online and by mail. The fastest and safest, of course, is online. So you create an account at ssa.gov. You'll verify your identity by uploading a picture front and back of your valid ID. You'll answer some security questions pulled from your credit report, and it's best to do it on a smartphone because they send you a link to use their web portal to take the front and back of the ID. Then you'll get a security confirmation code that you have to enter, and then your account's officially created. And then you can request your replacement card. And again, they'll ask you for your ID or driver's license number and then a safe mailing address. And you get the card in about 2 weeks, and it is free. If you have to do it by mail, then you have to fill out form SS5, which is linked in here in the PowerPoint that'll be mailed out to everybody, and then mail it to your local office. And you must also mail an original proof of identity. So often that means mailing your actual state ID with this application, which is really impractical. It could also be your green card. The one we use most often is a certified medical record. So that works as proof of identity for pretty much anyone, so regardless of age. Only for US citizens. I take it back, not anyone. But the certified record must contain the name of the treating facility, a date, and a live signature from the custodian of records. We usually ask for a face sheet or a demographic sheet because it does not contain the person's private medical information. It's just their very basic information. So we'll mail that off along with Form SS5, and then 2 to 6 weeks later, sometimes longer, you'll get the card and the original documents by mail. So the online option does not work if you're applying for a Social Security card for the first time, or if you need to change information on it, like your name or date of birth or status, or if you are a non-citizen requesting a replacement card. And lastly, if you've had an excess number of cards issued, so it's 10 in a lifetime, and I believe 5 in a year, I'm not positive. But in that case, you would need a letter from an employer or a social agency. So we've written this letter explaining why the person has had excess cards issued and why they need another one. So for most of our clients, it's because their cards are stolen, because they lack permanent housing, and they need it for employment. So you can try to call an office and request an appointment to go in person for these things, especially if you're presenting a USCIS document. I strongly caution against mailing a green card that took a year and $500 to get to Social Security, because it could get lost, but regardless, they're going to keep it for several weeks before they return it. And if you're tempted to mail your ID to Social Security and then go to DMV to get another ID, that's not a great idea, because each subsequently issued ID invalidates all the prior. So you can only have one valid ID or driver's license at a time. So the one that you've sent to Social Security is now invalid. I don't know if they would know that, but DMV does, and it's not a good idea. And then lastly, well, not lastly, but next, USCIS records. So currently, there's been an announcement recently that USCIS is waiving fees and offering expedited processing for survivors of the Marshall Fire and other natural disasters that need to replace their documents. I tried finding it this morning. It doesn't look like there's an official process for that in place yet, but you can use Form I-912, and then one of the 3 options are that you're experiencing a financial hardship, which I'm sure most people in that situation would be. So you could claim that and then include evidence, I think, of what happened to them. There's several questions in the form as well. And then you can request expedited processing as well. And then if the person needs a temporary document, you have to deal with USCIS over the phone, which is not my favorite. It's not Alex's favorite either. But if you call the main number and then say info pass, you should get a live person. Otherwise, they'll just send you down the menu and refer you to their website. Once you're able to schedule an appointment, they'll send you to the Denver USCIS office. And usually they want to see a passport or an expired card that they'll either stamp or place a sticker on it to extend. The only exception to this is refugees and asylees or legal permanent residents who adjusted from those status. They're not expected to have a passport from their home country. They can take a passport-sized photo, and then USCIS will create a temporary credential for them using Form I-94. USCIS also implemented a rule during COVID that extends validity of green cards when you get the filing notice showing that you filed your new I-90 or in 565. So you're attaching the notice to the expired card, and it extends the validity of the card. But again, the downside to that is that you need the actual card, so that it's not helpful to a lot of folks. And then Senator Bennett's office announced that they're helping replace documents. You can also utilize your federal representatives to expedite that processing as well. We've worked with a few of our congressional and Senate representatives to help us with some of our longer term cases. Oh, I see there's a message in the chat. Oh, thank you, Brett. Brett's with the main CLS office number in the chat if someone needs to call and get a voucher. Okay. So other vital records that a person might need to replace. Passports, they'll need their birth certificate and their state ID. So that would be one of the later documents to get. Current processing time is 8 to 11 weeks, which can be expedited to 5 or 7 with an additional fee. I believe you can get it even faster than that if you can show an urgent need. For instance, a plane ticket for international travel, and you can go to the Colorado passport office. Senator Bennett's office is also providing assistance with this. They could probably help expedite. I couldn't find information on if they're assisting with the fees. So that would be something to ask them directly. And then you might also need a marriage or divorce decree. So these are obtained from the county where the marriage or the dissolution occurred. So either through the court or the clerk. Usually you can get these over the phone. They're pretty easy, and most of the clerks are really helpful and agreeable. Sometimes you can order them through the county websites. I think most of the bigger counties in Colorado, the clerk recorder has a website where you can search for the license and then order online, and it's very affordable. I think it's less than $3 in most of the counties that have that option. No ID needed. You just need to know the marriage information, or at least the parties' names. And if someone's not sure what county they were married in, maybe you live in one county and you got married in a different county and you're not sure which one you got the license from, CDPHE offers a marriage verification that will do a statewide search. Not every state has this option, so it's one we're fortunate to have in Colorado. And then to get Medicaid, Medicare, and insurance cards, so contact your local DHS office for Medicaid. Although realistically, you shouldn't need your Medicaid card for much. In my experience, they usually don't ask for it whenever clients go receive medical care from a provider. Private insurance you would get from your provider, and then Medicare you can request online through your Medicare account or by calling this phone number. And then this I included. I don't think it will be useful to anyone. How are we doing on time? I can go through it real quick. So this is something we do more for people who are born out of state and getting a Colorado ID for the first time. But if there's a discrepancy in their records, they may need to get a legal name change to reconcile them and get a state ID issued. We have seen this for a few people who are getting replacement IDs as well. Maybe it just hasn't come up before, but for whatever reason, DMV flagged it this time. The most common name change scenario that we see is child is born and biological dad's name is put on the birth certificate. Dad and mom split up, mom remarries, and then child uses stepdad's name. And then the child's never formally adopted, the birth certificate isn't amended, but every other record in that child's life is in stepdad's last name. So if you're getting a name change in Colorado, the first step is to get state and federal fingerprint-based criminal background checks. They'll be attached to the petition as an exhibit. If you have a felony conviction, then you must notify the prosecuting attorney in the districts where the felonies occurred of your intent to change your name and provide a copy of the background check, and prosecutors have an opportunity to respond. In Colorado, the prosecutors are obligated to notify the victims of the crimes of the name change, so they have an opportunity to respond as well. Felons can only change their name to a name that appears as an alias in their CBI report. If it does not appear there, then they can request that it be added. In most counties, a judge will hold a hearing and then get some testimony on why the name change is necessary, questions about criminal history, and then order publication if appropriate. If ordered to publish, it'll be 3 times within 21 days in a newspaper of general circulation in that area. And then once publication is complete, then the order is issued. So if the person has been a victim of domestic violence, domestic abuse, a victim of certain crimes, or the purpose of the name change is to reconcile their gender identity, then there are statutory waivers for publication for those folks. The trickiest part for most of our clients is just the getting fingerprinted. So CBI's instituted this program called CABS, where they're utilizing private partners who do digital fingerprints. So Identigo and Colorado fingerprinting are the two most frequently used, and they require a primary identity document to fingerprint the person. So our folks who are needing a name change to get an ID at all have been in a really tough spot trying to work within these provisions. So if someone wants to change their gender marker, it's done primarily through self-attestation in Colorado. So on your state ID, there's a form. Adults just self-attest, but if the person's a minor, then they'll need a certification from a provider, a medical or behavioral health provider, and a parent or guardian, and they can change it to male, female, or X. You do not need to change your birth certificate or any other documents. So if you present documents that have one gender marker, you just sign this form and can change to another. Likewise, there's a process for amending your gender marker on your passports, and the current options are male and female. I believe the Biden administration announced very recently that sometime this year they intend to roll out an option for X gender markers as well. And in that you need a medical certification from a treating professional. And then for Colorado birth certificates, it's also done by self-attestation for adults. And the options are male, female, intersex, and X. And then there's a separate process for minors where it's similarly a treating medical professional certification and then a parent or guardian certification. And then there'll be two separate forms that they complete. So the sex designation form and then the general form for all birth certificate amendments. And then this is a little bit about what we do. So CLS is a nonprofit law firm, and our mission is to provide meaningful access to high quality civil legal services in pursuit of justice for low-income persons and members of vulnerable populations throughout Colorado. So our program primarily assists low-income, disabled, and senior Coloradans and those experiencing homelessness who need to resolve identity issues or obtain identity documents. The Colorado ID Project is actually a coalition of multiple agencies. So our partners are Metro Caring, the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, and Denver Human Services. And then here's the income limits for our program, which I think most of the folks present know about our income limits, but generally it's 125% of the federal poverty level, waivable up to 200% in certain situations. In certain counties where funding is eligible, seniors have no asset and income limits for eligibility. In Boulder County, we do have that special funding available. And then our program is statewide. There are 26 organizations that participate in the voucher program. I believe the Boulder County Bar was also providing vouchers at the DAC when it was open, working with Metro Caring to do that. And it's by far been the most successful element of the and far-reaching part of the ID project. From the beginning of the grant through July 2020, which is when we have the last available data, they had given out 36,159 vouchers to assist people with replacing their documents. And most of those are pretty vulnerable people. 1 in 5 are military veterans, 1 in 4 people with disabilities, 2 in 3 are experiencing homelessness. It's just been a very great program we're very grateful to have. And then what our program specifically does is providing vouchers, helping people get state IDs for the first time, replacing immigration and citizenship documents, especially if needed to get a state ID, including green cards, certificates of naturalization, certificates of citizenship, and consular reports of birth abroad, legal name changes to resolve discrepancy, amending birth certificates, delayed registrations of birth, complex identity issues, and then replacing birth certificates from any state. And then here's how to reach me. Does anyone have any questions about that slew of information?
Well, thanks, Casey. That was a lot of really useful information. I do have one question. You know, I think as you know, Boulder County was maintaining a disaster assistance center where folks who were victimized by the Marshall Fire had a number of resources all in one place to sort of help them with the initial stages of document replacement and recovery and things like that. That center closed last Saturday, so the information that you provided today is certainly going to help folks going forward. But I was wondering if you had any tips from your practice on dealing with these organizations during COVID, because I know just from my own perspective of trying to help folks at the Disaster Assistance Center that it was a little hard if either the agencies weren't there, or if something necessitated reaching them by phone. And just wondered what your experience has been, and if there's any tips for either individuals or us as their representatives, their attorneys going forward to try and help them deal with red tape in so many areas, but this one is certainly a key one for others that will no doubt follow.
Thanks. So I did talk to some of DMV staff yesterday specifically about this issue and asked if they were accepting walk-ins at their Boulder County locations. And they said that they are, and that if anyone says that they're a survivor of the Marshall fires, then they get seen immediately. They get same-day service and they do not have to have an appointment. I'm not sure if it's just those two locations or if it's all of the DMV offices. I know for the most part, DMV is appointment only, and that's been a big struggle for our clients. It's kind of a hodgepodge approach of some of them you can go to, and if they have any open appointments or cancellations, they might have you wait around and see if they can fit you in that day, but there's no guarantee. Social Security has been a really hard one. I would just try to call the local office and see if you can avoid having to mail your stuff, because sometimes it does get lost. Sometimes it's very slow. Social Security has been really tough.
Have you had success on or have your clients in getting appointments with the local office?
So we had a private contact that was given to us by one of our health and elder law attorneys that we had to lean on, and then that person left the position. So we haven't been trying to call the main number. Or Alex, maybe you've tried. Do you have any input on that?
No, I have not had to call SSA recently since that contact left, so I can't really add to that.
Yeah, that's been the toughest one, because in my gut, I cannot mail off a $500 green card that took us a year to get, if going through the standard processing time. So yeah, we just try to find a contact and get a hold of someone locally that can schedule an appointment for the person to go. So yeah, I don't have any tips for getting.
No, it's a tough
there.
one. No,
we looked into one and she left.
It is a tough one, and I've tried to contact SSA in Denver too, and it's not always an easy or efficient process. Yeah, especially now when they're
when I had to go in person before COVID, I would always go to our Lakewood office because the Denver one is just so busy. And I would get in faster, but it's still Social Security at the end of the day. Like at Denver, even with an appointment, you still get to wait an extra hour or so. And then the county vital records offices, I believe they're all accepting walk-ins. I know the Denver one's been pretty busy, but again, you can walk in there, whereas you can't at the CDPHE office.
Great, thank you. Every bit of information will certainly help folks down the road, and those who are assisting them with these processes.
Yeah, of course, and feel free to reach out to us if you have a question as well. I mean, a lot of this is just what you develop from practice. So until you have to, get a Texas birth certificate, you probably don't know what the weird requirements are. We've developed a spreadsheet, so whenever we get you know, a new case, and we figured out which state we need a birth certificate from, we just have to consult our trusty spreadsheet that's been developed over years and years and gets updated all the time, that says the fastest way to get it and what are the weird stuff that they ask for.
Great, thank you. I'll go join on camera for just another minute here. Are there any other questions for Casey? Or I know she's joined today by Alex Wade, also from Colorado Legal Services. So thank you to you both. Certainly a great opportunity to ask any questions if there are particular clients that you've been trying to assist or issues that you anticipate coming up. And otherwise, we will certainly reach out to both Casey and Alex as questions come forward.
Yeah, of course.
No?
Brett,
Okay.
anything you wanted to know about ID work?
No, I think I've been fortunate enough to see a couple of your presentations over the years. I just to remind everyone, this is going to be posted on the BCBA website though, so it will be available after the fact. What I guess my only question is, what would be your willingness to receive calls from other professionals in the future?
I mean, email is probably the best way because usually I'm going to respond with a whole bunch of resources and links. So easier to give it out that way.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, anyone watching this, please email.
And it's on the last page of the slide as well.
And I think, Casey, you're providing the slides as part of the materials that will be available to us and going forward for the home study. Yeah.
I'll email them out as soon as we wrap this up.
Great. Great. Okay, well, unless there are any further questions, we thank Casey and Alex for being here today. Thank you so much for the information that'll really help, you know, our Boulder County residents who have been victimized by the fire going forward. And thank you for your willingness to respond to questions as they come down in the future. Thank you both.
All right. Thank you. Have a nice day.